Welcome to ETF Leaders, powered by the New York Stock Exchange. I'm here with Darek Wojnar, who is the head of funds and managed accounts for Northern Trust Asset Management. Welcome.
Thank you, good to be here.
Good to have you here. So, Darek, let me ask you, do you have a favorite ETF in the lineup?
It's a little bit like asking which of my children is my favorite. I have two of them. With FlexShares exchange traded funds, it's a little bit easier. We have more than 30 of them, but thinking about it from perspective of Northern Trust Asset Management, this global large asset manager that has this wonderful brand of exchange traded funds that serves multiple investors in many dimensions, it's hard to name one. But I will name one just because for some pockets of investors, who think about de-risking their portfolios but yet want to generate income, high yield has played an important role. And we have a value scored exchange traded fund with the ticker HYGV, which plays into that demand quite strongly. We've seen meaningful flows. I think that in that context, for that segment of investors, I would say HYGV must be named.
Excellent. So we're seeing record high inflation now, just the inflation at the highest point it's been in decades. Are you concerned about that? Should investors be preparing for inflation?
I think all investors must think about inflation as some aspect of preparing their portfolio for the eventuality of inflation being higher than they expected. And today is certainly one of those periods. And maybe it has started with shortages and disruptions in logistics. But over time, we've seen certainly implications of sanctions on Russia as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. We've seen implications of perhaps worker shortages in some segments of the industry with a really tight labor market. We've seen it in context of perhaps energy and mining and metals and various resources. So I think investors should pay attention to it under any circumstances, but particularly now. And we've seen also very interesting response from investors who engage with Northern Trust Asset Management and FlexShares in particular. We have a lineup that includes many funds that particularly well play as a strategic hedge for inflation, or in some cases a tactical hedge for inflation. One of the examples will be Global Upstream's Natural Resources Fund. The ticker is GUNR, G-U-N-R. And that's essentially a very diversified play on upstream, closer to the ground resources, and that includes energy, metals, agriculture, timber, as well as water, so it's quite diversified. We also have quite a few funds that are playing a different role. So for example, TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Security, with very much targeted duration. Investors utilize them both tactically and strategically, and this is right now the time where their concerns can be addressed with these funds specifically.
You mentioned energy earlier, and when you talk about energy, hand in hand, you got to talk about ESG. So how are you looking at the ESG space at the moment?
Well, so broadly speaking, as Northern Trust Asset Management, we've been working with investors around the globe, focused on sustainability and ESG matters for more than a decade. And we're one of the leaders with more than $130 billion of assets that are managed in some fashion or form with some components of ESG thinking. One aspect that we discovered, that we found over the course of those years, is that investors have access to many sources of information and data. And the question is, how do you process it all in a way that is sensible for investors? And Northern Trust developed a scoring mechanism that leverages and incorporates many of these inputs. Northern Trust Vector Score utilizes both SASB, Sustainable Accounting Standards Board inputs, as well as TCFD, a task force for the financial disclosures that are climate-related inputs. And I think that all of that allows us to create portfolios that represent markets. So we have a offering of very much core funds that represent US equities, developed markets equities, but also credit and high yield fixed income securities that really leverage this vector score to achieve that portfolio that represents market, but improves on sustainability measures. And I think that plays a role for every investor. They should look at it. In some respect, I think about it, it's a little bit like looking at the food that you eat. You don't only want to have green vegetables, you want to have a balanced meal, but you want to understand that they're sustainably produced, and you want to understand that they're nutritionally going to sustain you.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Darek. And thank you for watching. This was ETF Leaders, powered by the New York Stock Exchange. Thank you, and see you next time.